Welcome to the Green Team episode on The Lions of Al-Rassan by Canadian author Guy Gavriel Kay. I am your host of today, Toramir, the Steward of Pundor, and with me I have Jeff Dugan, Hurifan, and Ashman.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hi.
So guys, we could make this a really short episode because I know all of us love the book and we could just say, go read it, goodbye. But we're not going to do that because we want to tell people why they should read this book.
Because it's
and
good.
we're going, because it's good, but we
It's
need
really
to go
good.
a bit further into that. It's really
It's
good.
really,
yeah.
really good.
So, for those who have not read it and want to read it, and we're going to do a completely non-spoilery first part where we talk about why the book's so good and you have to go read it. And then we'll do a full spoiler and impressions part afterwards.
Sounds like a plan.
It's a good plan. I think I made it, so it's a good plan. Now, The Lions of Al-Rassan is a 1995 book by Canadian author Guy Gavriel Kay. Kay is known, among other things, for his work with Christopher Tolkien on the Silmarillion, and for his fiction, which spans from traditional fantasy in the Fionn-Var Tapestry to later books with a form of fantasy using elements more or less directly taken from our own history. Now, The Lions of Al-Rassan is part of a very loosely connected chronology that runs through many of his books, but it's a standalone work and works very well on its own. So, this book, why do we want people to read The Lions of Al-Rassan?
Okay, I will start. It's beautiful, and it's some of the most beautiful writing I've ever heard. The characters are fully realized and believable, and it explores religion and intolerance and war better than most books I've read.
Yeah. Beautiful is definitely the first word I would use to describe it as well. Like, Kay's writing it's on another level to almost every other author that I've read. People go on about his prose. Yes, his prose is very good. For people who think they don't like good prose, I let me submit to you that you might not have just read good prose. Good prose is not equivalent to purple prose. Kay is very, I would say, economical in his writing, and yeah, he doesn't go on and on describing the clothes of everyone in the room or waxing poetic about this and that. Everything that he writes serves at least two purposes, as far as I can tell. Or if it is just something poetic, then it's actually incredibly beautiful and to the point. He doesn't go on and on and on and on about these things. And
He could write one sentence that perfectly encapsulates the moment and the emotions, and it can hit you very hard.
yeah, and you can just turn it over and over and over again in your mind, and it's very profound. You can tell he spent a lot of time thinking about it, and
Maybe he
as well,
didn't.
maybe he didn't. Maybe he's just that
Maybe
good.
it's just
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, Canadian authors can do that sometimes, right?
Hey, Tor, you forgot to mention in the intro, he went to the same high school as my favorite author, Steven Erikson.
Oh, so we have a tie-in to the Malazan theme. Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
this is basically the Malazan universe.
No, but I'll make I'll make a little bit of a separate case that's partly the question of what do we mean by good prose, and why this as an introduction to the writings of Guy Gavriel Kay. So I'll start with the question of what do I mean when I talk about good prose? And I would say if I'm going to say that something has great prose or that the prose is well written, it's going to fall into one of two buckets. Either in every sentence, every word has a considered purpose, and you can't add to or subtract from the sentences without the meaning and emotion falling apart. The other is where I've done the description of it begs to be read out loud. For those who are familiar with it, I would give Catherine Valente's Fairyland books a classification as incredible prose in the begs to be read out loud category. I think that Kay falls much more into that first category, where you can't add anything to what he has written, and you can't take anything away from what he has written. without the structure threatening to crumble. And I say that having listened to Lions as an audiobook.
It's interesting that you say that because I've heard people who have tried to read Kay as audiobooks, and some of them couldn't follow it because they felt the prose was too convoluted. There's too much going on. You have to go into each sentence, and you have to be able to read it twice, 3 times, 4 times before you can fully grasp it. But I agree with you that it is language that is very beautiful when read aloud, and it is dependent on stress and cadence and how you read the sentence. So I'm a bit torn in both directions here. Yeah, I am.
Yeah, there's like I didn't read a lot from this book that I was thinking like this as an isolated quote is something that'll like that I feel the need to share with a lot of people. Actually, feeling this book felt like a very intimate experience because of the depth of emotions and the weight of what's happening. But at the same time, it does feel very like it has a very poetic through line, and that everything is deliberate, as Jeff was saying. And yeah, it does expect more from you than if you're reading what I would call bad, okay, not lackluster prose, which I guess can turn some people off, but
Or make them sleep.
or make them sleep, I guess. Man, I have a hard time imagining anyone being put to sleep by this, unless they just really don't like the historical aspects. But
It gets pretty damn exciting later on.
it gets exciting. It gets like so tragic, and like Kay is like ruthless in his unwillingness to sacrifice nuance for the story.
Um, when I was reading it, I found a lot of hidden meanings inside the words, lots of beautiful motifs and symbolism that can be inferred from previous passages later on, and I love finding that kind of thing. And that's precisely why I could not listen to this on audiobook, at least not while listening to or reading the book itself.
I think with me, I've read most of Kay's books by now. I think there's one or two I haven't read yet, especially the last one that came out this May. But his books overall leave me with a sort of melancholy feeling, uh, and I feel that apart from the start of the book, where we get to know the characters and are introduced to the plot, there's always this sense of anticipation of the inevitable. We know sort of where this is headed. We know that, well, someone's going to die, perhaps. Something's going to end. There's a contrast between the now and the afterwards. And we know that there's going to be sadness. There's going to be that feeling of bereavement almost. And in this book, the theme, I would say, is something of the contrast between the permanent and the transitory, and whether it's right for humans to strive to leave something behind. Is it all futile if it's all going to end? And also, was it Hurin who was talking, or Asher was talking about the
If it was smart, it
differences
was
between.
definitely him.
It was something about the differences between religions and cultures.
Oh, that was
That
Huron.
was actually
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So will this meeting of different traditions, different cultures, different religions, will it always lead to conflict, or is there hope that we can strive to build something together despite differences?
Is that rhetorical, or is it? You ask that. Ask that again.
I took his question as a rhetorical statement of the theme, but
Okay.
because a few other people have talked about melancholy or heavy themes, this is definitely a book that needs the right frame of mind to be picked up. By pure coincidence, I started this book the first time within about 48 hours of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, along with some other things that are happening closer to where I live. And the bleak that the news had me feeling, combined with a couple of very brutal things in the first chapter or three, meant that I had to put it down and walk away for almost a month. And then we got fairly close to where we originally thought we were going to be recording this. And it became an, all right, I need to pick this up again. I need to go back from jump. But I'm in a little bit better place to approach it. And I would say that part of why that is the case is a separate thing that I would say is one of the principal themes. Maybe secondary to what Tor said a minute ago. I would phrase as men do very little in the way of evil so much as when they are motivated by zealotry. And just sort of and thinking my way through particularly some of the very beginning and some of the very end of the book, that feels to me like it's a fairly spot-on statement of motive.
I'll just add that this book to me doesn't feel, so there is a lot of tragedy that occurs. There's a lot of heavy themes, but it doesn't feel oppressive. There are many moments of they're lighter moments, and I think another one of the themes is like learning to savor those moments, even though you know what's going to happen next might be terrible or almost certainly will be terrible. Just kind of taking things as they come feels very central to this, and yeah, we can end it
This
there.
doesn't give too much away, but yeah, this book is not cynical
No,
in the least.
I didn't say it was.
No. I just
No,
didn't want to give that
that's-
impression to the
Yeah.
listeners.
Yeah.
And I think
Point.
that the rhetorical questions that I asked could be seen as a confirmation that this book is sad. It's not sad, it's melancholy, but it has sort of this golden cord of hope running through it, that there are people in the book that choose to try to leave something good behind, even if they know that their lives will end sometime. They work towards happiness or joy or beauty for some people, for most people, and we get some insights into the zealots, and even for some of them, there are thoughts of, is this the right way? Could we do this differently? And we see things are not black and white. There's a lot of gray, and also in the depiction of the various peoples that we meet, and the three religions and how they interact. There's a lot of gray area that is, it's not evil, it's not good, it's what it is, and it's life, basically.
I would like to make one statement. Tori, you said this book is not sad, it's melancholy. But if you do a quick Google search, the definition of melancholy is a feeling of sadness. So,
But,
eat
well,
those
okay,
words.
can I say it's not, it doesn't leave you feeling bereft. Not everything has been taken away from you. You're left with a heavy feeling, but there is a feeling of hope and a way forward, even if
You explained yourself
sadness,
well enough the
heaviness
first time.
is,
I'm just being
yeah,
pedantic.
yeah, I know.
Should we give like a non-spoilery background to like what the story is about? Because we've just kind of like talked about these like vague ideas,
Yeah.
right?
And I know also we could put it in a historical context, because I did mention that Kay bases most of his post Fionnavar books on actual Earth historical periods, and then he twists them around a bit. I'm probably not the best one. I'm not the best one to give that historical background, but what I can say as an intro is that we are finding ourselves in a medieval-ish Spain analog, and we've already mentioned religions, and that's something that we want to get back to. The religious conflict that runs through the book. But someone feel free to take over and tell us all about El Cid and the Moors and the Reconquista.
Okay, I'll start at the Reconquista because it's kind of a misnomer to actually call it that. So, in case anybody didn't know, you probably been living under a rock or don't know medieval Spain history, but uh, Muslims were like uh, were in control of Spain for about 700 years. They're the Moors, and yeah, it's really interesting history. But calling it a reconquista is a bit of a misnomer because it implies that like this land that used to be somebody's, that they took it back, but in reality, like it was about 700 years, and the people who conquered it didn't really have anything to do with the people who were conquered in the first place. Um, but yeah, medieval Spain, the Christians, they lived up north and they were fighting each other. After about 700 years, like I said, they kind of took back, in heavy air quotes there, the southern areas that were controlled by the Moors. And this story takes that story and condenses it a lot, like a lot. Keep that in mind.
Condenses it from something that in historical Europe was the space of about 200 or so of those 700 years into the span of a couple generations.
Like, yeah, okay.
We go from the father or maybe grandfather of one of our main characters through our main character and maybe just barely ending with his son.
Mhm.
In the course of this, one of the key actually historical and quasi-mythological characters of historical Spain
El
is
Cid.
El Cid. There is, in the Lions of Al-Rassan, we have a character whose name and whose actions have some very heavy parallels to the life of El Cid, to the point that you could almost maybe say that this is Kay partially, but not completely, retelling the lay of El Cid.
For
Because
our non-Spanish listeners, El Cid is Spanish for the Cid.
the real life El Cid, whose name is sufficiently close to the character in the book Rodrigo de Bolivar, that's where I keep wanting to go with it, and I'm going to be lazy and not look it up right now. But the real life El Cid was a general and knight who did spend a lot of time in service with the Spanish king, but also at one point in his life was exiled from the relevant kingdom of what would now be Spain and took service with the Moors for a span of time.
I think we can probably tie it off soon. With like the additional context that in addition to this being a conflict between people who look a lot like Christians and people who look a lot like Muslims, there's also people who look a lot like Jews living in the middle and who get caught up in this.
Yep.
Yep,
That was great and succinct. Thank you.
it was. But at this point, I think that what I would also say is, if you haven't read the book, go away and come back.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's honestly one of my favorite books that I've ever read, like top
And
50 easily.
It's not even like a big investment because it's one book and it's
like 500 pages.
Yeah. So like really do yourself a favor. Read it. If you don't like it, I don't know, you must be a monster or something.
Do we want to make sure people know how much we love this? Do we want to give it a star rating at this point? Or should we wait until the end?
I'd give it whatever, like a high 10 out of 10, I guess.
1 star out of 1 star, which is 100%.
Yeah.
I don't know. The more I think about like star rating, the less I like it.
Yeah, I tend to be with Huron on that. I will give this a recommendation with that qualifier of you need to approach it in the right frame of mind. And that if you've got a lot of otherwise heavy stuff going on in your life, that it may not be the right time for you.
Or maybe the perfect time.
I will give this a heartily recommended out of 5.
Yeah.
Okay, that concludes the non-spoilery part of this The Lions of Al-Rassan episode. So if you haven't read the book, please tune out now. So where do we start?
We start with the best character not getting the girl. My man, Alvar. Man,
Oh. Yeah.
Jahane.
I mean, he has a good life.
He's got a great life, but man, like
Yeah.
he basically got Jahane Mark II, and I don't know, I was rooting for them the whole time, and I'm very disappointed. And Kay
Newer
even did
model.
that thing at the end where he's like, yeah, and like that character, the best character in the book, he's got this wife, and she's like Jewish, and she's like a doctor, and like he's a Jew now, And it's not who you think it is.
I mean, I would say that Jahane is the best character in the book.
She's great. She really is great.
And she's the first character we're introduced to, and we follow her through the entire book. And she gives a lot of commentary on the dynamics, being both a woman and of the weaker of the three religions, the most persecuted one. So she gives us a lot of insight into this world.
Her perspective was greatly appreciated.
Um, and she's especially able to call out the idealistic men that are set up in opposite, well, sort of an opposition to each other, which is Rodrigo and Ibn Kairen.
Ibn Karan.
I don't, Kairen, yeah. Because at one point, Rodrigo was like, "You should come over to the jihadist side. We're not gonna harm you. We're not gonna tax you like the Asharites will." And she's like, "You remember this historical figure that all of the Jadites pay homage to and do tribute to? Yeah, she says that we're monsters and she advocated genocide for us." And then Rodrigo's like, "But we're not like that anymore." And then, of course, later on, the Jadites are exactly the ones that raise the Kindath city to the ground. Not to excuse the Asharites, who also commit genocide against the Kindath.
And don't forget Alvar, his mother was a big fan of. So
Yep.
that queen was actually based on a real Spanish queen who was just very terrible to the Jews during that time. And she's still venerated by some. And I mean, from the certain perspective, she was very beneficial, but to the Jews, she was absolutely a monster.
Whatever way the wind blows, it always rains upon the Kindath. I think the phrase is in this book.
And you
Pretty
could
apt.
just replace. I always forget their names. It's Jedi, Kindath, and
Asherite.
Asherites. So I'm just going to call them Jews, Muslims, and Christians because that's so much easier.
Oh, but we might get in trouble with Kay then.
That's true.
I know. He wants us to separate from that and be like, okay, these people aren't exactly that, and so you need to look at it like a metaphor, or you could, interpret it however you want, or you could, you could take it and apply it in different places, and that's what's so great about fantasy and so great about his writing. But it's just the parallels are just so obvious.
They're very
Like,
strong.
But this ties into how my mother feels about fantasy and science fiction. She keeps saying, "But why does it have to be told like this? Why couldn't you just use the real world? Why rewrite the world like this?"
Because when you do it to the real world, you have to have all of that baggage there. Like people are going to bring in their own biases from the real world and they're going to apply it to a situation exactly like that. But when you make it a fantasy or you make it a science fiction, you're just working with abstract ideals. In this case, not so abstract because it's pretty obvious the parallels. But that's exactly why I like science fantasy.
Well, in this case, are the parallels maybe a little too on the nose?
Mm,
I don't think so. I do like the subtle distinctions between the faiths of the Kindath, the Jadites, and the Asharites.
that they basically all worship celestial beings and they might be the same thing anyway.
Well, and the Kindath worship the moons as the sister to the sun. The Jadites like it. No, those are demons, or whatever they say. But I think that no matter how you feel about Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, there's a lot of very beautiful and compelling ideas in these, and that's why these religions have taken root and survived for so long. And Kay is able to use a lot of those ideas and philosophical groundings and kind of import them wholesale. And in doing so, I think these religions feel very real and very grounded in and of themselves, where it might be difficult to make them feel like that if he removed them further. Because a lot of the world building in fantasy can feel very perfunctory or almost false, especially if it's done in a book that's can be treated as standalone, like Lions of Al-Rassan can.
So he's getting a lot of things for free in his storytelling by just basing it on a template, basically.
Mm-hmm.
He could take all the things that he wants to without all the baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Or he could take the baggage that he wants to. It's all up to him.
Yeah, and we will pick up on that quicker because we know it's based on a real world analog. Yeah.
The listeners forgive me if I use the real world analogs. Oh, I will try. I know the Kindath are the Jews.
Yep.
The other two, I don't remember.
Well,
The other
just
two
keep
hate. The other
reminding.
two hate the Kindath. So
So there's so much to pick up on here, but I want to hark back a bit to what Jeff said at the start about his first experience with this. And there is an episode in the first chapter that's called later The Day of the Moat. How do we feel about this way of introducing one of our main characters? Because it's quite gruesome, and I feel that the detachment that we feel when hearing Kairan's thoughts as he's walking towards the sunset after 139 people have been beheaded, uh, it gives us a look into his character that may turn out not to be quite true as the story progresses. But at that point, I felt that, oops, this is not a good man. He's able to put this behind him so quickly and just erase it.
the first part of the book is him murdering what king?
Caliph.
Yeah, the one of
Sure,
the
Caliph.
yeah.
And then like he meets Jahane, and he's like covered in these rings, and he gave me real Malik Rel vibes. And if anybody knows who that is, you would understand what I mean. So yeah, it was definitely working against him. I and that might be the reason why I was rooting for Alvar the whole time.
So I I was predisposed to not like him. I think um, part of that was because Jahani was primed to not like him either. Um, he seemed very arrogant and all this stuff. But as the book goes on, it's really becomes apparent that it's impossible to really put him in any one box. He's not a religious fanatic. He's not a cynical man. He's not just a soldier. He's primarily thinks of himself as a poet. And at the end, he kills Rodrigo, who I really liked. um, but at the same time, even though I really disagree with his reasons for joining the Asharites in the war, like I can't get behind the Jadites. And there is something beautiful about the concept that he was fighting for, although I think it was still misplaced.
Yeah, none of the main characters are simple.
No.
They're
Yep.
all incredibly complex, and knowing I've read Tigana before, and it's the same way in Tigana. So I should have been expecting that, but at the beginning of the book, I'm just like, man, this Ibn Khairan guy, I don't like him. And I think he knew what he was. Well, obviously he knew what he was doing, but he's just giving us a little bit of the piece of the picture, a little more of the picture, a little bit more, a little bit more, until you find yourself and you're like, oh my god, I don't want him to die. Because it just feels so real, man.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This was my first case, so I didn't necessarily have a reason to expect I was going to be walking into characters of the level of complexity that we have. The Day of the Moat is not the reason I had to walk away. I had to walk away in the aftermath of the soldier who had put his sword into a woman's womb and beheaded the baby. Yeah, not a good time. Gotta stop and walk away.
Hmm. And I think what goes on during that raid on the village of Orvia is meant to cause anger in us. It's meant to put us in the same frame of mind as Jahan is in at that point, because it's righteous anger uh, against actions that are inhumane, basically.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I had enough righteous anger going on my own that
Yeah.
it was I don't need that stoked anymore right now.
Mm.
Kay is really willing to go to the depths of human experience, and I think it provides a great contrast to the beauties of human experience. And I really so that raid on that village, it doesn't endear you to the Jadites at all. This is essentially your introduction to them in the story, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also impossible to blanket condemn them because, first of all, Garcia Dorada, he was acting completely on his own volition, but within the cultural context that he came from. So you can't absolve them either. And it's not the Asharites of the Kindath that punish him, it's the Jadites themselves. Rodrigo Belmonte. I think that's how his name's pronounced. So while Kay is willing to show the depths, he's also not willing to condemn either side, but he's also not willing to absolve either side. And he's also not saying that everything is like it's pointless to try and be an ethical person. So I like how he kind of sidesteps all of those problems that come in narratives. I think the last comes especially in grimdark narratives because yes, you can't completely get away from the cultural context you're raised in, and people do things because of that. But that also doesn't absolve you of horrendous things that you do, and there are very, very, very few people that are just evil.
Well put. Can we talk about Rodrigo's family? Because they're awesome.
Yes.
All right, so their introduction. What was the name of the dude that Rodrigo's like, hey, like GTFO, I'm going to kill you? And then he went and
Garcia.
attacked his family? Garcia, okay. Yeah, that dude, him. And then like he attacks his family, and his wife is a bamf. Like,
Yep.
like his kids, one of his kids like magic, and like he sees it coming, so like they're all ready for him. And it's from Garcia's perspective. So after Garcia does this terrible stuff, we get his perspective, which is cool. And then like he and his men just get their asses kicked, and his wife kills him in just like a very satisfactory way, and all the politics after that. And that's why it's just, I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of the book. It was cool. Anything else?
Yeah,
And go ahead.
well, I was gonna say
And there's a Western parallel here. Sorry, I took over, but there's a Western parallel. The rabid dog being put down, the rabid dog being Garcia de Lara. He's one of those people in the book that we feel that you're a caricature. You don't really belong here. We want nice rounded characters, and you're not it.
No.
That's a good observation. Yeah, you're right. It felt like a Western, like the scrappy people in the town are fighting off the bandits, Seven Samurai style.
Jeff, you had something to say.
Yeah, I was going to point out that Diego's clairvoyance is really the only overtly supernatural element in the story.
Yeah.
And if you,
I would like to. I read an article, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but I read an article by a Polish academic talking about the absence of gods in fantasy literature, and with the lines of Al-Rassan, there are no acts of God. There is no deity intervening in human life. Everything that happens in the name of a god is done by people. And so it's a story about, we were talking about religious zealotry, and it's a story basically about what people will do in the name of their god without any action that we can see, at least from this god.
See, you say zealotry, but there are very few zealots in here. Like what I say in this book are what people always do and people in power do is they wield religion for their own gains. The people in power are not really zealots.
I would say Queen Inez is.
Okay.
And I forget the name of the king that conquers the peninsula, but he does wield the power of the religion, but he's also not completely cynical about using it. And it's only possible because there's been this movement by the Jadite Church to essentially embark upon a crusade, right?
Yeah. Queen Inez and the head friar on the Jadite side. And
I don't remember him. Who is he?
he's the friar who turns around and, functionally speaking, kidnaps Diego.
Oh, that guy.
That guy. And
Okay.
then, and on the Asherite side, there's whoever replaces Ibn Kairan as the chief advisor to the Caliph. Sort of the head of the,
There's also the ones living in the desert, Yazir ibn Karif and Galib.
That's what I was thinking of. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, I'm wrong.
Those three people, I would say, all three of those are absolutely zealots.
And I also think you can't discount the fact that Rodrigo Belmonte and Ibn Khairan, they're both religious. They're both devout men. They're
They're
both
not zealots,
pious in
though.
their. They're not zealots, no, but their
They are
religion
pious,
definitely
and
informs their
piety's not
actions.
wrong.
Not
Yes, and
necessarily.
that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying. Like,
yeah, yeah.
that's what I enjoyed about these characters is that everybody is deeply religious. Everybody has, well, I shouldn't say deeply religious. Doesn't come off that religious to me, even though she's definitely does have
I think
some.
she's very religious, but spirituality in Judaism can manifest in different ways.
Either
Than
way,
yeah.
I think what's really important is like religion is very important to these people, and
Mhm.
it is very influential in nearly all of their decisions, even the leaders. But they're not zealots. That's the point I was trying to make.
This is true. You can't just reduce them down to that.
Yeah. And what we see when the sort of crusade to retake the peninsula actually happens, it's as much sort of the demands of society on these kings.
Mhm.
Society would, well, they would even have a revolt if they did not follow the demands of the church to actually take back the peninsula.
Mhm.
Because they kind of cultivated a monster that's hard to control, right? They
Yeah.
brought up all of this fear and hatred for especially the Kindath, but
Yeah.
also the Asherite. The Asherites are the
Asherites.
Moors,
Yeah.
right? Okay, and like people in power are just as much at the mercy of their people as like the other way around, right?
Mhm. We see that in the massacre of the Kindath at the whatever the city is. I don't remember the name of
Oh, that was terrible.
it.
And
Done
like
by the
you saw it coming from a mile away. Or just
yep
it's like a train wreck. It's hard to look away. Like no,
the
stop it.
yeah the governor of the city let the religious functionaries rail against the Kindath more than they usually did, and this stoked such hatred for people that are really their neighbors. so
Shout out to the
horrible.
prostitutes. Thank you, prostitutes. They were
Yeah,
awesome.
honestly, prostitutes,
They
grade
were so
A members of
practical.
society. Yeah, they have to be, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like those are like some of the contradictions that happen when you have this level of religious zealotry. Like, um, yeah, like, no, we're not going to get into that. But yeah, like these Kindath have been living with these people for decades, and they've been coexisting peacefully. The Kindath are notably not violent. They're not troublesome. They just kind of want to pay their taxes. Yeah, they just want to pay their taxes and be left alone. And because of the the fervor that's been stoked up against them, because they are the weakest enemy, not because the Jadites are like objectively more dangerous to the Asharites, and the Asharites are objectively more dangerous to the Jadites. But the Kindath are always there to be stepped on, and they're not they're not the type to really form a violent resistance. Like even after everything that's happened to him, Yohane's father saves the life of Diego just because it's the right thing to do.
I love that scene. That was
It was
such a great
it was
scene.
a beautiful
Mhm.
scene.
This blind dude
Yeah.
who's blind because, he got his eyes poked out from helping out, what was it, Asherite woman?
Yeah,
Giving a
Yeah.
C-section to an Asherite woman, and he saves the life of Diego, even though he's blind. And oh god, it was right here in
and
the feels.
even though the Jedites had destroyed the city of the Kindath, the one place in the world where they could be free from persecution, like that. Even though she'd never been there, Yohane feels like an immense sense of loss when it's gone because like that was the thing they could look to. Be like, there is hope for us to be free and to be able to live our lives without all of this. And it's gone. It's taken away. But it's rebuilt, which is nice.
Oh yeah, and his tongue was cut out.
And its time was get up.
Yeah. So before we mire ourselves too much in these religious battles, I think we should probably move on to maybe looking at some of the characters. And I have one that we're not going to stay on too long, but I want to talk because we have some experienced Malazan fans here. And I am thinking
Yes?
about introduction of the character of Alvar de Pelino at the beginning in chapter 2. And my thoughts were that if this had been a Stephen Erickson book, I would have had good money riding on Alvar being dead by the end of the chapter. because of the way he's
You're
introduced.
gonna say that. It's so true. I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, this kid's dying. He's gonna be dead in like the end of the chapter.
Yeah, and it just to take that minor character at that point. I mean, he was minor, and turning him into one of the main characters is an example of how Kay writes, how he picks up on little threads and weaves them into the rest of his tapestry and creates a story out of it. And it also gives us, after we've had this introduction from a Kindath and an Asherite, and we know that these northern brutes are not so sophisticated, and then suddenly we get this young man who might be a bit of a farm boy, but he's got a good head on him, and it's
Mhm.
clear that his society isn't the uh, zealots maybe that Jahan makes us think that they would kill all Kindath on sight, stuff like that. Uh, it's nuanced. It's more nuanced than the impression that we're given at the beginning,
That dude has quite the journey, doesn't he?
Yes, he
Like,
does.
and with a few twists as well.
like I love Alvar. I've said that the whole time. But like it takes a special character to be able to reflect that much on himself and change as much as he did. I mean, the dude changed his religion. I think he might be just chasing tail, but
Mm.
still, that's impressive.
I also appreciate the fact that some of the things that I don't know about you guys. I felt like after Garcia Dorada raided raided the Belmonte estate, that either he would somehow get off scot free because that's kind of what we're set up to think for some stories, or that after he died, Rodrigo's wife would be executed for it, or something along those lines. And it actually just ends with an equitable arrangement. Like the king is actually fair, and this is repeated sometimes, several times throughout the novel. And yeah, to me, it feels like Kay is saying these horrible things aren't inevitable, even though they might feel like it. But also, some things are super hard to prevent, and will win out in
And,
the end.
and
Who knows?
and people can make compromises and be reasonable with each other. And not
Yeah.
only that, like after the king was done, right? So like Rodrigo had the problem with Garcia's older brother, correct?
Hmm.
And he set the man in charge of protecting his own family, which was a great move and incredibly practical. And I love that little that bit.
And Rodrigo lets him out of the "if my family is hurt, you'll be put to death," because he's like, "No, this is too much. I don't want this man to be punished like this because it's not fair." And then later on, that man repays him by dying to defend his sons.
Yeah, what a great book.
Yeah,
And it's part of that we were discussing, or I was talking about earlier, with the gray areas, because the older Derada, I don't remember his first name, but anyway, his well, we see him as an evil man, basically, or not evil, but anyway, very calculating and not working for the best of everybody. He's working to promote himself and the kingdom that he is the constable of. Uh, and we see still that in a situation, as you said, that where he can choose between saving himself and saving others, then he does actually save the others.
I give thumbs up for our listeners who can't see me.
So I would like to talk about uh, Amar, our friend, the poet. We've mentioned him before, but we start at the introduction, which I'm hoping to tag on to the end of the episode. So those of you who want to listen to it again can listen to it there. But he's introduced to us as a very young man uh, who, for some reason, is killing the last caliph of Al-Rassan. And he ponders on, will this mark me till the end of my days? And then we follow, I think maybe to a certain extent, we follow his quest to not have that be the end of his life, the way it's told. He wants his story to be told differently.
Yeah, and he very much is defined by that act throughout the book. And like he wants to do his poetry. He does eventually escape the war, which I find to be it was a great touch. Um, but yeah, I don't think he ever completely escapes it, despite all of his efforts. Like in the history books that people will presumably be writing about this, he will be the one recorded as having killed the last caliph, and also having defended the peninsula from the Jadeite invaders. Um, but you can't completely remove the quote stain on his character.
And it, no, and in fact, his original act of regicide, I think, does tie back to that parallel that got used of there being a rabid dog who needed to be put down, because it
In this case, like a sickly dog, right? Not necessarily a rabid one, because the caliph was like a really weak man, I think it was said.
Yes, again said sort of indirectly in the language that Kay uses. He's saying with just one adjective that this man was not a leader. He was
He was
someone
not a
put
true lion.
no, he was put as a puppet in this role of caliph. And it tells us about the decline of Al-Rassan, that they had four caliphs basically at the same time or in the same year. There's no true leadership. Their culture is going down the drain. They don't have a stable system of government. They may be ready to be taken over. It's all collapsing and being divided into minor kingdoms.
And
Multiple leaders being assassinated.
yeah, there are several replacements that could have, quote, brought Al-Rassan back to its former glory, like the ruler Al-Malik. Al-Malik? I don't know his name.
Al-Malik.
Yeah, but he gets assassinated by his son in retaliation for something that happened earlier, and because his son was insecure about his own position, but his son wasn't the man that his father was. And then as well, the ruler of the city that had the Kindath advisor. I don't remember any of their names, but yeah, he could
Collective
have.
advisor.
I
Fazana,
loved
I
that
think.
city. Yeah, that was one of the tragedies. I think the great tragedies of the novel, because that city was portrayed as like a fantastic place. It was multicultural. It was tolerant, and it was like it was a hub of learning and of architecture and of all these beautiful things. And it can't survive the clash between the Jadites and the Asharites, because the the fact that they have a Kindath vizier, that is untenable to the Asharites, because the Kindath are evil, and this educated man, this wise man, this man who has led Fazana to its glory, sacrifices himself to save the city by going out to the Jadites, and he essentially martyrs himself.
I have a quote about this city or about the people of this city, by Husari ibn Musa, uh, the the one
Like
who
him.
escaped the day of the moat,
Mhm.
and it is I think just before this carnival in is it Ragosa?
Oh
Yeah, I think
yes,
it's yeah,
Yeah, Barbosa.
Ragosa, and the
it's
king
Ragosa,
is
yeah.
Badir and the Ben Avren. Is that
Yes,
yeah,
Yes.
whatever.
yeah.
But he says, "Brave Alvar and my poor self, as we stand humbly before you, are proof that men of different worlds can blend and mingle those worlds, that we can take the very finest things from each to make a new whole, shining and imperishable." So it's that idea that Ragosa stands as this hope for the world, maybe that we can take the best things of each culture and blend them together and make something that won't go away. That's his hope at this point. And I
Doesn't go
think
great
that,
for Ragosa.
I mean, it's a very optimistic view, and it goes against what we see in much of the book. The thought that something can be imperishable, that something can survive. And then we have Ibn Khamar's words at the end of the book, when Al-Rassan has finally fallen, that it is only living on in memory and in his poetry. So I think that's one of the things that the book is setting up for us. Do we believe that some of that will survive? And if it only survives in verse, in memory, was it still worth it? Um,
I don't
Yeah,
know.
this book
Was
is
it?
very concerned with beauty, I think. And I think a lot of the people are compelled by ideas they find beautiful. Like Ibn Khaldun, his motivation to defend the peninsula is because he harkens back to this time when there were lions in Al-Rassan, and sure, they might have been tyrannical in some respects, but like it was a beautiful time. He thinks he's not sure. We're not sure. We don't really get any perspectives from that time. And on the other side, Rodrigo, he dreams of this united empire of the Jadites, and it's hard to completely discount this dream either. Um, as much as again, I disagree with what he's doing. I think Ragosa was the true quote solution. Um, but at the same time, these ideas and these images, I think they do survive, and they do end up having leading to people building a better world together. And I think that is possible, and I think that's reinforced with the fact that the Kindath city is rebuilt at the end.
I think it's uh probably intentional, this, because this time in Spanish history, the time when the Moors down south and the Jews and the Christians were all living together, it's kind of, depending on your perspective, it's by many modern people, it was kind of seen as this wonderful place of intercultural people living together and being tolerant. Or it was a time of warfare and bloodshed and hatred for one another where they didn't get along at all. And each side have their own points, but I think in reality it was more like a grudging tolerance, might not be the right word, but they lived with each other.
Mhm.
A little bit of why not both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably what the real case was, right? And so I I think that's why Kay used this as a setting.
And even though they're, like again, the Kindath, they're persecuted throughout the novel. And they start out in Fizana, and Fizana isn't great to them, but there still is beauty there. There still is value to be had. And it's not like the Kindath are just a persecuted minority. They're so much more than that. It's so much more nuanced than any reductionist narrative would have you think.
Can we talk about how much of a tease Mr. K is?
are
The
we
final
talking
chapter before the
about
epilogue?
Not just the final chapter, man. Do you remember that chapter where like you're like, "Oh man, this guy's dead." No, wait, it's this guy. You're like, "No, it's actually this guy." And like you thought everyone was dead at the same time, even though only one person was actually dead. And then he changes the perspective at the last second when he makes you think that somebody else was dead. And I was so angry because I thought my boy Alvar was dead, and then I thought my boy Rodrigo was dead, and then I thought my boy Ibn Kairan was dead, and
Turned out it
man,
was the servant.
and then yeah, Jeff, like you said, the last chapter where there was a duel and then it just ends, and if you don't read the prologue, you don't know. Yeah, it was the servant, which I think I would have preferred it if like it was like Husari or somebody. Even though I love Husari,
Mm.
right?
But he does it a lot, this hinting at what's going to happen. I mean, the narrator flat out tells us, oh, somebody died, or someone's coming, but he doesn't tell us
Or
who. We discover that.
he didn't forget to close the
Yeah,
door when he left. It's like
yeah.
what does that have to do with anything? And, like they tell you, like, oh man, I'm so stupid.
I mean, at the end of chapter 2, they're outside of Fazana, and they know someone's coming towards them, but we have no clue who is coming. And the whole next chapter is the vehicle for getting the people who were coming at the end of chapter 2 to the end of chapter 3, where they arrive at the camp outside Fazana.
Pays a
And also,
tease.
he's got one of these, which is also centered on Fazana, where we get a small part of a chapter focusing on Jehan's mother, and when she's walking through Fazana, and these merchants are being mean to her or cold, and she's tipped off by this prostitute about this mood turning towards the Kindath.
There are a few people that
And we
tipped him off. I really like that.
yeah, and we get this at a point in the story where we think it's simultaneous with what we're reading in the rest of the chapter, but it's not. It's taking place maybe, I think, 3 or 4 weeks later in the story, And we don't understand that until that actually happens, that the rest of them are riding towards Vizana to try to save them because they know what's going to happen. They've been told. Uh, and that teasing, telling us something ahead of time, like that staggered storytelling where you pick something up and move it. So I feel like it's almost cheating when Kay tells us that it turned out it was too late. Uh, and oh, it was too late. And then I think it takes 4 or 5 chapters until we actually know why was it too late, how was it too late, was it too late. It's it's almost infuriating to me that he manages to make me think something is happening at one point in the story and it's not. That particular instance is almost cheating because it's taken out of the timeline. But there are so many other hints like that where he's saying something and you can only guess what's actually taking place.
Like a
Yep.
crafted messiness, sort of. Except for, of course, there's nothing messy about this book.
No.
It's only messy until we have all the pieces of the puzzle.
Yep.
I'd describe it as mom spaghetti.
But the main piece I was thinking on, kind of looking back over some of what we'd done collectively, are that not only had Tor had something about kind of wanting us to think about thoughts on the epilogue, but it's sort of the last listener question we got beforehand that we haven't addressed.
I forgot we had those.
Yeah, kind of the only one that's left basically is what do you think about the ending, or that tie of last chapter into epilogue.
I think the real question is, would this book have been better if we cut out the epilogue?
Who asked it?
Oh, that's it. It's a good
Oh,
question.
that's my version of the question.
That's Tor's version of the question.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, who was the listener who gave the question?
It was
Checking just a second. Murph.
Murph.
Murph
Thank you,
1976.
Murph. I'm trying to get your name said on the podcast. These guys are just trying to ignore it. That's a really, really hard question to answer because I would have been unsatisfied with just I don't know. Maybe I would have been okay. I would have been perfectly satisfied just knowing one of them died, and I think it would really have a beautiful poetry to it. But at the same time, I want to know. It's like there's this contradiction in me. Plus, man, Alvar. I'm glad that he had a happy ending and he got his kidnapped wife, who's a doctor. But
I think it would have been perhaps slightly more poetic to have left out the epilogue, but I think the epilogue adds a lot to the story in that it kind of highlights the fact that the last chapter, it's not like historical events never really end. They have consequences that propagate into the future, and that despite horrible and tragic things happening, there's always new life that happens afterwards. And so you can kind of lose that if you just say, okay, this is when the Roman Empire fell, and then we're not going to deal with anything that happened afterwards. It's like this great catastrophe of civilization. It's like, no, there is a continuum here. There is stuff that happens after. There is new beauty that's...
Ash, where did the Roman Empire fall?
Oh, that's not a question I'm going to answer.
No, give me a date.
A date? No.
Yeah, like a single day. Give me a second.
A single day. Yeah, it was the first time actually that Rome...
historian.
It was the first time Rome was sacked by one of the Italian tribes.
You don't know anything.
Wasn't it the Vandals? I mean that's where we have vandalism from.
Oh, you're right.
I agree that ending at the end of the duel is the thing that it's in keeping with part of the tradition that he was in dialogue with. Because, like I said, but I said earlier in the show that Rodrigo Belmonte's life has some very strong parallels to that of El Cid, and that the threads of Rodrigo's life in here feel a little bit like he's in dialogue with the tradition of the Chanson de Roland or the Lay of El Cid. And those are both things that just end with those last stand death of protagonists. I think in the end, the main reason I don't like the epilogue is that a lot of what he's played with through the rest of the book is ambiguity and uncertainty. And if you end at the end of the last chapter, you're left with that ambiguity and uncertainty of who it is that died in the duel, and therefore what happened because of it. Whereas by putting in the epilogue, that ambiguity gets removed and pulls a little bit away from one of those themes. But at the same time, ending with the duel ends it on a much more traditionally tragic note, where including the epilogue does have that life goes on emphasis.
Basically what I said.
And
Yeah, I'll hear it.
I mean, I think we're all on the same page there, that you can make a case for either of them. I
And
think
you can
I would.
enjoy both of them and dislike both of them.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a thought, and it regards the sort of the form of the epilogue, because what I mainly dislike about the epilogue is that I feel there is a lot more. Well, it's not a lot more telling, but it's a lot more very forced showing of the aftermath, what actually happened. So I had a thought: would it have been better if the epilogue had been the letter that Miranda de Belmonte, Rodrigo, or whatever sent to Alvar? Would the text of the letter had been less overt in collecting all the threads?
I like that
I
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that idea as well. I think it might have Kay is too good a writer to fall into this, but it might have fallen into the trap of the butler. It's like, as you know, all of this happened, and then as you know, Alvar married this. I, I don't think he would have done that, but I think
Might
the
have come off too
danger is
forced.
there. Yeah.
I would have preferred to know all of the names of Alvar's children and which house that
Oh,
they ended up in.
Hogwarts house. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely a Slytherin.
definitely.
And that they named him. He named his kid Rodrigo. Rodrigo, Diego, something something,
Amelie.
Johanne, Al Arand,
Amar.
Emil,
Yazir.
Husari, Slytherin.
But not Garcia.
Oh, maybe Garcia. You never know.
The most
You're
hated
you're
child.
you're named, you're
The
named
oldest.
after the man I know that was most comfortable in his own skin. A mind untroubled by questions of ethics or any sort of brilliance.
A man who got things done.
Man of Jad.
I think basically what we can all agree on is that there are good things in the epilogue. We wish kind of that some threads had been left alone. We didn't need all the answers, and we didn't need it told so explicitly.
We definitely needed more urine flasks.
Urine flasks.
Not enough of those.
That might be my biggest complaint with the book. It's just the fact that urine flasks are there. I have no idea the
It's just
historicity of that. I just
so
hated them.
much.
They're a real thing, Ash.
Yeah.
The-
Yeah, okay, yeah. I believe
Bring
that.
a urine flask. Yeah, just carry it around in my pocket.
But being able to tell, is there anything crystallized?
Beautiful urine flask. Gucci
But
Amar.
it was very nice, and it was engraved. And what's good
Yeah.
about it is that you can hold it up to the light and you can see what color is this urine? Are there any crystals in it? Is there
I
blood?
inherited from my father.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he couldn't see
Soaked in his
anymore.
urine.
So if you get your eyes poked out, you can no longer use the urine flask except as the donor.
Or you can still use it if you need to taste it, but
Smell it.
unfortunately your tongue
It's
has been cut out, so you can't do that. You can
Or you
smell
can
it, I
smell it.
guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You still have some taste buds like in the back of your throat.
Oh, it's true. You gotta really swish it
It's
around.
not like you can cut off the whole tongue, right?
Gargle. Yeah. I, I'm wondering if this is just a good opportunity to read the one quote that really stuck with me. Looking back afterwards, Johanne was acutely aware that the smallest of gestures in that moment could have changed everything. She might so easily have told the smooth, polished Cartadin that she'd attend upon Ibn Musa later that day. If so, the thought was inescapable. She would have had a very different life. Better or worse, no man could answer that. The winds blew, bringing rain, yes, but sometimes also sweeping away the low, obscuring clouds to allow the flourishes of sunrise or sunset seen from a high place, or those bright, hard, clear nights when the blue moon and the white seemed to ride like queens across sky strewn with stars in a glittering array. A different life if she hadn't gone. Less wind, less rain. Perhaps none of the visions offered those who stand in the high, windy places of the world.
Good job, Kay.
Oh,
And I mean the way he switches between the mundane telling of actions and then I'm not going to say waxes poetic, but suddenly turns to metaphor as a vehicle for the story.
Certainly doesn't wane poetic. Are we gonna get a rant about Sanderson prose from Thor over here?
I don't think we need to today.
No.
Good, because I need to go to bed.
Yep,
Well, I want to say something because the difference between telling a story in the description of everybody's actions and what they're thinking and their motivations and why they do it and hinting and showing through their environment, showing through the use of adjectives that may or may not be describing the person but just be describing a mood or the weather or the architecture. I mean the
Dialogue,
use
what's
of
said and what's not said.
yeah, and at the same time using the flowery language at the right places. I have one sentence that I would like to read. Uh, After 10 days of riding, they intercepted the army of Ragosa heading towards Cartada, and time, in Al-Rassan the Beloved, began to run swift as horses towards its end. The turn that that sentence takes from after 10 days, we're describing what's happening. Very literally, an army is riding from Ragosa towards Cartada. And then at the comma in the middle of the sentence, and time in Al-Rassan the Beloved began to run swift as horses towards its end. It's lifting the perspective up from that very concrete thing that's happening until you see the story, you know this is the end. This is the beginning of the end. It stops here. It's sort of the meeting of that mundane description and the very poetic language that lifts you up from the concrete and into the overall perspective.
and it's
That was
so,
beautiful, beautiful tour.
yeah. It's so fluid, and it feels so natural when Kay does it. Not just because he's great at turning a phrase, but the time running as swift as horses, swifty like horses or whatever, is linked to them actually riding horses. So it doesn't feel disjointed ever. He flows like water. RK, well done.
Okay, that concludes our episode. You can find us on the Legendarium's Discord. The invite link is on thelegendarium.com. We're also on Twitter at GreenTeamPod and Reddit. Join us in supporting the Legendarium via Patreon. Shout out to Horizon Brave for starting it all. Thank you to our panelists Hurifan, Ashman, and Jeff. I'm Toramir, or Ture, and until next time, thanks for listening. Music is Galactic Damages by Jinglepunks.
Sayonara.
Bye.
So good
Goodbye and
morning,
be
good
well.
night. It's not as hard as it was before. Change of plans. So it's less
That's
hard.
what she said.
We don't need to get into a conversation
that's
about
not
hardness.
staying in the
Tor.
episode.
We get it. It was harder before. Now it's less hard.
Things aren't what they used to be. Degradation. There are no more
These
lions.
things come with age.